I forgot my ticket, but when I heard my husband upstairs in our mansion, I stopped cold. The morning began like any other, perfect, polished, and planned down to the last minute. At least, that's how I thought it would go. The sun poured through the tall windows of our mansion, casting golden streaks across the marble floor. I could hear the faint hum of the staff moving through the house, preparing breakfast, checking luggage, ensuring everything was ready for our flight. We were supposed to be leaving for Paris that afternoon. My husband Daniel had planned the trip, a romantic getaway, he called it. I wanted to believe him. I was standing in front of my vanity mirror, adjusting the diamond studs in my ears, when he appeared in the doorway. "Ready, darling?" he asked, flashing the charming smile that had once made me fall in love with him. "Almost," I replied, giving my reflection one last glance. I looked composed, hair pinned neatly, white silk blouse tucked into tailored trousers, my makeup subtle but flawless. Everything about me screamed control. "Good," he said, checking his watch. "We should head out soon, the car's waiting." "I'll be just a minute," I said. He nodded, already halfway out the door, phone in hand, always on his phone, always busy. I exhaled, staring at my own reflection again. Something about the way he said it, the rush, the distraction, made me pause, but I brushed it off. We were fine. We had to be. After all, we had built this life together, this mansion, this image of success. From the outside, we were the perfect couple. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to keep believing that. I grabbed my purse, my coat, and followed him down the grand staircase. The car was waiting at the bottom of the drive, luggage already loaded. Daniel was standing beside it, talking on the phone, packing slightly. His voice was low, hurried. When he noticed me approaching, he quickly ended the call. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Work," he said smoothly, flashing that same practiced smile. "You know how it is." I nodded, but something about the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine made me uneasy. The ride to the airport was silent, except for the faint hum of the engine and the rhythmic tap of his fingers against the leather seat. I stared out the window, watching the city blur by, my mind half on the trip ahead, half somewhere else entirely. We were only 15 minutes away from the airport when I reached into my bag to grab my passport, and froze. It wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I rummaged through every pocket, every zipper, growing frantic. "Daniel," I said, my voice tight, "I think I left my passport at home." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're kidding." "I'm not," I said, heat creeping up my neck. "I had it on the dresser last night. I must have forgotten to pack it this morning." He looked annoyed, though he tried to hide it. "All right, the flight's in 2 hours. If you hurry, you can still make it. I'll check us in and wait at the lounge." "Okay," I said, already reaching for the car door. "I'll grab it and come right back." He leaned over to kiss my cheek, but I barely felt it. My mind was already elsewhere. The driver turned the car around and sped back toward the mansion. I sat in the back seat, replaying the morning over and over in my head. How could I have been so careless? But as we pulled into the long driveway, an unexpected chill ran through me. The house looked different. Still beautiful, still grand, but somehow hollow. The kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, it felt wrong. "Wait here," I told the driver, forcing a smile. I stepped inside, the heels of my shoes echoing against the marble. The air was still, too still. I walked through the foyer, past the spiral staircase and toward our bedroom. My heart was racing, though I couldn't explain why. As I reached the base of the stairs, I froze. A sound drifted down from above, soft, muffled laughter, a woman's laugh. Then a man's voice, Daniel's voice. My blood turned to ice. For a moment, I couldn't move. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. Something stronger, something raw and angry, rose inside me. Slowly, carefully, I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, each breath coming shallow and fast. Halfway up, I heard her voice again, playful, teasing, then his, soft, familiar. A sound I knew too well. My vision blurred, my fingers tightening on the railing as I reached the landing. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar. I could see the faint flicker of light spilling out, the outline of shadows moving inside. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached out and pushed the door open. And just like that, my world shattered. Daniel was standing by the bed, shirt unbuttoned, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. Her hair was tousled, her laughter dying on her lips as she turned to look at me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Daniel stepped forward, his face pale. "Lydia, wait, this isn't." "Save it," I whispered, my voice trembling but sharp. The woman, tall, elegant, younger, grabbed her clothes and bolted past me without a word. I didn't even look at her. I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on him. My husband, my partner, the man I had trusted with everything. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me." "Lydia, please," he said, his voice low, desperate. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, a cold, hollow laugh that didn't even sound like me. "You really think I'm that stupid?" His face twisted in frustration. "You weren't supposed to come back," he muttered before catching himself. That was all I needed to hear. I turned away, the air thick with the scent of perfume and betrayal. My knees felt weak, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Without a word, I walked to the dresser. The same dresser where my passport still lay, exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, slipping it into my bag, my hands trembling. He followed me to the doorway, his voice breaking. "Lydia, please, can we just talk about this?" I turned to him, my eyes cold. "There's nothing left to talk about." And then, without another word, I walked out. Down the stairs, through the foyer, past the life we had built together. The driver was still waiting outside, reading something on his phone. He looked up as I approached, clearly confused by the expression on my face. "Back to the airport, ma'am?" he asked. I paused, the question hanging in the air. Then, for the first time since everything fell apart, I smiled. "No," I said softly, "take me somewhere else." He blinked. "Where to, ma'am?" I looked out at the long stretch of road leading away from the mansion, the life I had built around a lie, and felt a strange calm wash over me. "Just drive," I said. As the car pulled away, I turned to look out the window one last time. The mansion grew smaller in the distance, until it disappeared completely. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. The rest of the drive passed in silence. My hands gripped the passport tightly in my lap, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong, and everything that could still go right. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back, not to him, not to that house, not to that life. The betrayal still echoed in my mind, the image of him with her playing on a loop. But beneath the pain, something fierce was growing, a spark I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger, it was resolve. I had spent so much of my life building his dreams, living his life, shaping myself into the woman he wanted me to be. But who was I really? When had I stopped being me? I didn't have the answers yet, but I was determined to find them. As the car sped down the highway, I felt the weight of the past slowly lift. The woman who had walked into that mansion an hour ago was gone. The one sitting here now, she was different, stronger, sharper. And though she had been broken, she wasn't defeated. Not even close. I opened my passport, tracing my name with my finger. Lydia Graham. It felt like reading the name of a stranger. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this was my chance to meet her again, to rediscover the woman I used to be before I lost myself to love, wealth, and illusions. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the road ahead. I leaned back in my seat, watching the horizon. "I forgot my passport," I whispered to myself with a bitter laugh, and maybe that was the best mistake I ever made. Because if I hadn't gone back, if I hadn't heard the truth for myself, I might have spent the rest of my life living in a beautiful lie. And now, as the mansion faded from view, so did the woman who once believed that love meant silence. A new woman was rising in her place. And she wasn't going to look back. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, but my mind wasn't on the scenery. It was back in that bedroom, my bedroom, where my husband's lies had finally caught up to him. I could still hear her laugh echoing through the house, soft and cruel, like the sound of glass cracking before it shatters. I told the driver to pull over near a small cafe on the edge of town. My hands were trembling when I stepped out of the car. I needed air. I needed to breathe without choking on betrayal. The world around me was still moving, people drinking coffee, scrolling through their phones, chatting about ordinary things. But I felt like I had stepped outside of time. Everything had changed in an instant. My life, the one I had built so carefully, had crumbled in the space of a few heartbeats. I sat down at an empty table, my reflection staring back at me from the cafe's window. My eyes looked hollow, my face pale. I almost didn't recognize myself. The waitress came over and asked softly, "Can I get you something, ma'am?" I opened my mouth but couldn't find the words. I didn't want coffee, I didn't want food, I wanted answers, I wanted to scream. "Just water," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The scene kept replaying in my head. The moment I opened that door, the shock on Daniel's face, the silence that followed. It had all felt like a dream at first, too absurd to be real. But now that the numbness was wearing off, the pain was seeping in, slow and relentless. My phone buzzed on the table. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before letting it ring out, then again, and again. On the fourth call, I answered. "What?" I said coldly. "Lydia," he breathed, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God you answered. Please just listen." "No," I snapped, my voice sharper now. "You don't get to talk your way out of this one, Daniel." "Please," he said, "it's not what you think." "Oh really?" I cut him off, anger boiling over. Because it looked exactly like what it was. "Don't insult me with excuses." He was silent for a moment, then sighed. "You weren't supposed to come back." That sentence hit me again like a slap. "You weren't supposed to come back." The words echoed in my mind, heavy and cruel. So that was it. He hadn't even planned to hide it. He had just assumed I would be gone, out of sight, out of mind, while he enjoyed himself in our home. I let out a bitter laugh. "That's what you're upset about, that I came back too soon." "Lydia, please," he said, his tone softening. "I made a mistake, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything," I repeated slowly. "You were in our bed, Daniel, the bed we shared. Don't you dare tell me it didn't mean anything." He said nothing. The silence on the other end of the line was louder than any apology could have been. "I don't want to hear another word," I said finally. "You can keep your mansion, your lies, and your little adventures. I'm done." "Don't do this, Lydia. We can fix it, please." But I had already hung up. I sat there for a long while, staring at my reflection in the window, letting the quiet rage inside me settle into something stronger, something colder. For years, I had built my life around Daniel. I had supported him when he had nothing. I had believed in him when others didn't. I had turned down my own dreams to help him build his empire. And this was how he repaid me. A part of me wanted to cry, to scream, to fall apart. But another part of me, one I hadn't listened to in years, refused. No, not this time. This time, I wasn't going to break. I paid for the water I never drank and walked back to the car. "Take me home," I told the driver. The drive back felt endless. Every turn, every familiar landmark brought me closer to the place that no longer felt like home. When the mansion came into view, my stomach twisted. It stood there, beautiful and grand, but now I saw it differently. It wasn't my dream anymore. It was a monument to everything fake in my life. As I stepped inside, the silence was thick. I could still smell her perfume lingering in the air, a cheap floral scent that turned my stomach. Daniel was waiting for me in the living room, looking disheveled and nervous. He jumped to his feet the moment he saw me. "Lydia, please," he began, stepping closer. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to say," I replied coldly, setting my purse on the table. "Yes, there is." His voice rose, desperate. "I love you. What you saw, it was a mistake. It's over." I turned to him, my eyes hard. "Over? How long has it been going on?" He hesitated. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. I laughed bitterly, that long Lydia, please, he said again, reaching for my hand. You mean everything to me. I swear it didn't mean anything, I just… Stop, I yanked my hand away. Do you even hear yourself? You keep saying it didn't mean anything, as if that makes it better. But it does. Because it means you threw away everything we had for nothing. He looked away, guilt flickering in his eyes. I messed up, he whispered. I was stupid, but we can move past this. Move past this, I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. You broke us, Daniel, you broke me. He ran a hand through his hair, packing. You're overreacting. You always do this, make everything bigger than it is. And there it was, the gaslighting, the turning of tables, the way he always made me question my emotions. I stepped closer, my voice low but fierce. You cheated on me in our house, Daniel, the house I helped pay for, the house where you promised we'd build a life together, and you have the nerve to tell me I'm overreacting. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. You think because we live in a mansion, because you throw money at everything, that it makes you untouchable. But let me tell you something, Daniel, I built this life with you. I was there when you had nothing. I stood by you when no one else would. And this is how you repay me. His expression shifted, anger replacing guilt. You don't understand, Lydia. I've been under so much pressure, work, investors, the company. Oh, please, I snapped. Don't blame your job for your lack of self-control. We stood there, facing each other in the same living room where we'd once celebrated anniversaries, hosted friends, dreamed of the future. But now, it was just a battlefield. For a moment, I almost pitied him, almost. Then I remembered the look on his face when I walked in. The shock, not of guilt, but of being caught. I turned away, grabbing my suitcase from the hallway. I'm done, Daniel, you can keep your excuses. I'm not your audience anymore. Where will you go? He asked, his voice cracking. Anywhere, I said. Anywhere that isn't here. As I walked out the front door, he followed me onto the driveway. You're not thinking clearly, he called after me. I stopped and looked back at him. I've never been more clear in my life. The car door closed behind me, with a finality that felt like freedom. As the mansion disappeared from view once again, I didn't cry this time. I didn't shake. I felt awake. The betrayal still hurt, but beneath the pain was a strange calm. It was as if I had been walking through fog for years, and now, suddenly, I could see. Daniel had built his empire on charm and deception, and I had been the perfect wife, the quiet partner, the graceful supporter, the woman who made everything look easy. But not anymore. I wasn't going to be his shadow any longer. As the car turned onto the main road, I took out my phone and started making calls. Not to him, but to my lawyer, to the accountant, to the people who could help me untangle my life from his. For the first time, I was thinking about me. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I looked down at the passport still sitting in my lap. It wasn't just a forgotten document anymore. It was a symbol, a key to something new. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew this. Wherever I went next, it would be somewhere he couldn't reach me. Somewhere I could finally breathe. Somewhere I could finally be free. And as the sun set behind me, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, I made myself a silent promise. I would rise from this, I would rebuild. And one day, when he looked back and realized what he'd lost, I wouldn't be there to listen. I would be too far ahead. I didn't go far that night. The driver dropped me off at a small hotel near the city outskirts, a quiet, nondescript place where no one knew me, where my name didn't mean anything. I didn't want luxury or comfort. I wanted silence. I wanted to disappear. The moment I stepped into the small room, I felt the weight of everything crash down at once. The door closed behind me, and suddenly the strength I had been clinging to all day shattered. I dropped my bag on the floor, leaned against the wall, and slid down until I was sitting on the carpet. The tears came fast, hot, unstoppable. For years, I had believed in the illusion of a perfect marriage. Daniel and I were the couple everyone envied. The mansion, the vacations, the smiles for photos, everything looked flawless. But behind those walls, something had been dying slowly. I should have noticed it sooner. The late-night phone calls he always took for work. The sudden new cologne. The business trips that stretched longer and longer. The way he had started looking through me instead of at me. I'd told myself it was stress, that he was tired, that success came with pressure. I had made excuses for him, excuses that now made me feel sick. I pressed my palms against my face, the tears soaking my hands. My heart felt like it had been ripped apart and then set on fire. Betrayal wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. It was realizing that the life I had defended, the love I had fought for, was built on lies. After a while, the sobs stopped. What replaced them was worse, silence. A deep, hollow silence that rang in my ears. I sat there for a long time, staring at the small, cheap painting on the wall across from me. It was a simple landscape, just a field and a road leading to a horizon. Something about it held me, maybe because it looked peaceful, maybe because I wanted to believe that beyond this moment, there was still something ahead of me. I wiped my tears and stood up. My reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes were swollen, my makeup streaked, my hair a tangled mess. I didn't look like me anymore. I looked like a stranger, someone who had lost everything. And maybe that was true. But as I looked closer, I realized something else. There was still a flicker of something in my eyes. Pain, yes, but also defiance. I wasn't destroyed, not yet. I walked to the bathroom, washed my face, and stared at the woman in the mirror again. "You're not done," I whispered. "Not like this." That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying every moment, every word Daniel had ever said. But somewhere between the tears and the silence, anger began to replace despair. Anger at him for betraying me. Anger at myself for letting him. I had built my world around him, and now I saw the truth. I had been the architect of my own cage. By morning, something inside me had hardened. The tears were gone. The weakness had burned away. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing: I would never let him see me broken again. When I checked out of the hotel, the clerk gave me a polite smile. I nodded back, forcing one in return. My voice was steady when I spoke. "Can you call a cab for me?" As I waited, I took out my phone and opened my messages. Daniel had called 12 times. There were 5 voicemails and a long text thread I hadn't read. My chest tightened, but I didn't open any of them. Instead, I blocked his number. I had spent too long letting him fill my silence with his excuses. Not anymore. The cab dropped me at a coffee shop downtown. It was small, quiet, and smelled like roasted beans and rain. I ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching people rush by, laughing, talking, living. I envied them. They all looked so sure of where they were going. For the first time in years, I had no idea where I was headed. I opened my bag and took out my passport. The navy blue cover felt heavy in my hands. Just yesterday, it was supposed to be the start of a vacation. Now, it felt like the start of a new life. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I just knew I needed to leave. For years, I had let Daniel dictate everything: where we lived, who we saw, how we spent our time. He liked control. I had mistaken it for leadership. But now, the thought of being free from it all filled me with a strange kind of relief. I searched for flights on my phone, not even sure what I was looking for. Paris? No, that was his destination. Somewhere else. Somewhere he wouldn't think to look for me. My eyes landed on one. Lisbon, Portugal, departure tomorrow morning. I had never been there. That was reason enough. I booked it. It felt impulsive, reckless, but freeing. I was still sitting there, staring at the confirmation email, when someone cleared their throat beside me. "Excuse me," a voice said softly. I looked up. A woman in her late 30s stood there, smiling gently. She was dressed simply: jeans, sweater, no makeup, but there was kindness in her eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You look like you've had a rough morning." I hesitated. I didn't want pity, but something about her voice was warm, genuine. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She gave a small smile, as if she knew I was lying. "Okay, but if you ever need to talk, I'm here every morning. Name's Rosa." "Lydia," I said quietly. "Nice to meet you, Lydia," she said. "Sometimes life falls apart just so we can rebuild it better." Her words lingered long after she walked away. I didn't know it then, but that small encounter, the stranger's kindness, her quiet wisdom, was the first light in what had been total darkness. That evening, I went back to the mansion one last time. I had things to take care of: papers, accounts, clothes. It didn't feel like my home anymore, just a museum of lies. The house was silent when I walked in. Daniel wasn't there. Good. I went straight to my office, the one room in that entire place that was truly mine. I sat down and began making calls. I called my lawyer, my bank, my personal assistant. I told them everything. Calmly, precisely. By the time the sun set, I had started the process of separating my life from Daniel. And when I stood up, I felt lighter. Before leaving, I walked through the house one last time. Each room told a story: laughter that wasn't real, promises that were broken, and memories that now felt hollow. When I reached our bedroom, I paused. The bed was made as if nothing had happened. But the ghost of that day still lingered, the scent of her perfume, faint but there. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then walked inside and opened the windows wide. Cold air rushed in, sweeping through the room. It smelled clean, new. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened the closet, grabbed a box of matches, and lit one. I watched as the tiny flame danced in my hand, then tossed it into the empty fireplace. The fire roared to life, bright and hungry. I didn't burn everything. Just one thing: his favorite suit jacket, the one he wore on the night he first told me he loved me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. As the fabric curled and blackened, I whispered goodbye. When I left the mansion for the last time, I didn't look back. The next morning, I boarded my flight to Lisbon, alone. As the plane took off, I felt the world tilt beneath me. The city disappeared below, and with it, the version of me that had belonged to someone else. For the first time in years, I wasn't Lydia Graham, the perfect wife, the successful businessman's partner. I was just Lydia. And that was enough. I closed my eyes, the hum of the engines steadying my heartbeat. The pain was still there, it would be for a while, but beneath it was something new: strength. Because I realized something important that day: when you lose everything, you finally have nothing left to fear. And from that place, rock bottom, there's only one direction left to go. Up. The plane landed in Lisbon early in the morning. The sunlight poured through the small oval window beside me, washing everything in gold. As the city came into view, red rooftops, winding streets, and the sparkle of the Tagus River, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and anticipation. For the first time in years, I was somewhere Daniel had never touched. No memories, no ghosts, no expectations, just me. I stepped out of the airport into the cool air. A taxi driver waved a small sign with my name on it. The hotel I had booked was modest but beautiful, a small boutique overlooking the water. The kind of place I would have loved years ago, before my life became about appearances and perfection. The driver helped me with my bag, and as we drove, I watched the city unfold around me. People walking arm in arm, music spilling from open cafes, children laughing as pigeons scattered in the square. Everything felt alive. And yet I still felt hollow. When I checked into my room, I didn't unpack right away. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the view from the balcony. The sky stretched endlessly over the river, and for the first time in a long while, I felt small, but in a way that wasn't painful. It was freeing. I thought of Daniel. I thought of that woman's laugh, the sound of betrayal echoing through our home. But now, instead of tears, I felt something else: clarity. The life I had been living wasn't mine. I had spent years molding myself into the woman he wanted: graceful, quiet, perfect. I'd given up my career, my passions, even my voice, all to fit into a version of life that revolved around him. And where had it led me? To silence, to emptiness, to a mansion that looked like heaven from the outside but felt like a prison within. But now, sitting here with the sunlight spilling across my hands, I realized something. Maybe losing him wasn't my destruction. Maybe it was my deliverance. For the next few days, I walked. I walked through narrow cobblestone streets filled with color and sound. I watched artists paint in small squares, musicians play guitars by the water, and old women hanging laundry on their balconies while humming softly to themselves. Life was happening all around me, messy, imperfect, beautiful. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an observer. I felt like I was part of it. Each day, I peeled away another layer of the woman I used to be. The first night, I had dinner alone at a small restaurant by the river. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. No, I said simply, it's just me. The words tasted strange at first, but not unpleasant. They tasted like truth. Over the next few days, I began to rediscover myself piece by piece. I started writing again, a passion I had buried years ago. My journal filled quickly with thoughts, memories, and hopes I hadn't dared to voice before. On the fifth day, I met someone who would unknowingly help me find my strength again. Her name was Amara. We met at a cafe when she accidentally spilled her coffee near my table. She apologized profusely in Portuguese, and I laughed, telling her it was all right. Somehow, that small mishap turned into a conversation that lasted hours. She was older than me, mid-40s, with short curly hair and the kind of confidence that comes from surviving storms. She owned a small art studio nearby. You look like someone trying to remember who she is, she said with a knowing smile. I blinked, caught off guard. That obvious. She shrugged, only to those who have been there. I told her a little, enough for her to understand without needing every detail. Ah, she said softly, you were building your life around someone who never deserved it. Her words hit me like lightning. She wasn't judging, she was simply seeing me, and for the first time I didn't feel ashamed. Amara invited me to her studio the next day. I almost said no, but something inside me told me to go. Her studio was tucked between two old buildings, sunlight streaming through the high windows. The air smelled like paint, clay, and possibility. Everyone here is working on something, she said, gesturing to the few people inside. A project, a dream, a new beginning. She handed me a canvas and some paints. You don't have to be an artist, she said. Just create something that feels like you. I stared at the blank canvas for a long time. Then I dipped the brush in color and began. The strokes were messy at first, unsure. But as I kept going, my hands stopped shaking. The colors started to blend, to move, to breathe. I didn't paint a scene or a person. I painted feeling, the pain, the anger, the quiet strength rising from the ashes. When I finished, Amara stood behind me and nodded. There, she said, that's you. I looked at the canvas, and for the first time, I saw something powerful staring back. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. That evening, walking back to my hotel, I felt lighter. For so long, I had measured my worth by how flawless my life looked. But now I understood something important. Perfection isn't strength. Resilience is. I stopped in front of a shop window and caught my reflection in the glass. My hair was loose from the wind, my cheeks flushed, my eyes bright in a way they hadn't been in years. For the first time, I recognized the woman staring back. That night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights shimmer across the river. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the mansion, the wealth, the cold silence. It had once felt like success. Now it just felt like noise. And then I thought about Daniel. I wasn't angry anymore, I was done. That was my turning point. I realized that what happened to me didn't have to define me. It could refine me. I picked up my journal and began to write, not about him, but about me, about what I wanted, about the life I was going to build from this point forward. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words stopped being about pain and started being about purpose. Somewhere around midnight, I closed the journal and smiled to myself. I had made my choice. I wasn't going back, not to him, not to who I used to be. The next morning, I went to the studio again. Amara greeted me with a hug and said, "You have the look of someone who finally decided to live." "I have," I said simply. Over the next few weeks, I kept painting. I started taking walks at sunrise, watching the city wake up. I made friends, learned bits of Portuguese, laughed more than I thought possible. And every time I felt a flicker of fear of the future, of being alone, I reminded myself. I had already survived the worst. I was no longer running from the past. I was walking toward my future. One morning, I received an email from Daniel. The subject line read, "Please talk to me." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. He no longer had a place in my story. By the end of that month, I had decided to stay in Lisbon longer. I found a small apartment near the water, a cozy space with white walls, sunlight, and a little balcony overflowing with flowers. It wasn't a mansion, but it felt more like home than anything ever had. One afternoon, as I unpacked the few belongings I'd brought, I came across my passport again. I smiled. The same passport that had led me back to betrayal had now become the symbol of my freedom. It reminded me of something Amara had said one day in the studio. Sometimes, life breaks us open so that the real light can come through. That night, I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the city in orange and pink. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the betrayal, the loss, and I realized something beautiful. It had all led me here. To this moment. To this peace. To myself. And that was the moment I knew. I hadn't just escaped Daniel's world, I had stepped into my own. I whispered to the night, "You took everything from me, Daniel. But in the end, you gave me back the one thing I'd lost, me." The wind carried my words away, and I smiled, feeling something I hadn't in a long, long time. Freedom morning light spilled across the small apartment, warm and gentle, touching the corners of my new life. The curtains fluttered with the sea breeze, and for a moment I just stood there barefoot, holding my coffee, watching the world wake up outside. Lisbon was alive. The city had rhythm, a pulse I could feel through the walls. Street vendors calling out, the faint sound of church bells, the laughter of people heading to work. Every sound felt like a reminder that life was moving forward, whether I was ready or not. But that morning, I was ready. It had been almost a month since I left Daniel, and something inside me had shifted. The sadness that once clung to me like a second skin had started to fade, replaced by something stronger, something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom! The first few weeks had been messy. I cried more than I slept. I questioned everything, who I was, what I wanted, and whether I had made the right choice by leaving. But pain has a strange way of shaping you. It strips you bare until only the truth remains. And the truth was simple. I had been living for someone else. Now every small decision, what time to wake up, what to eat, where to go, belonged to me. I didn't realize how powerful that was until I felt it. That morning, I dressed in a white sundress and sandals, tied my hair back loosely, and left the apartment. The air smelled like salt and freshly baked bread. I walked down the cobblestone streets, passing the same cafe I visited every morning. Bom dia, Lydia. Rosa, the waitress who'd become my friend, waved from behind the counter. Bom dia, I said with a smile. She placed my usual order on the table, a croissant, coffee, and a little bowl of fruit. "You look lighter today," she said. "Maybe I am," I said, smiling softly. It was true. I had started sleeping better, laughing more, and even painting again at Amara's studio. My art wasn't perfect, but it was honest, it was me. Sometimes, I would sit there for hours, painting memories I wanted to keep and releasing the ones I didn't. Every brushstroke felt like healing, like rewriting my story with color and purpose. One afternoon, while I was painting, Amara came over with her gentle smile. "You're changing," she said, studying me. "I feel it," I admitted. "For the first time in so long, I'm not pretending to be okay, I am okay." She nodded. "Good, because healing doesn't mean forgetting what broke you. It means learning how to grow beyond it." Her words stayed with me. That evening, I went for a walk by the river. The sunset painted the sky in gold and pink, and I stood there watching the reflection shimmer on the water. I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I was gaining. It hit me then, I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. I had started journaling every night, something I used to love before marriage swallowed my identity. The pages were filled with raw honesty, grief, anger, hope, and dreams I had buried long ago. One night, I flipped back through the pages, and found something I had written during my darkest days. He took everything from me. I stared at those words for a long time. Then, slowly, I picked up my pen and crossed them out. Beneath them, I wrote, "He didn't take everything, he just gave me a reason to take it back." That became my mantra. The next morning, I went back to the studio with new energy. Amara noticed right away. "You look like someone who made peace with herself," she said. "Maybe I did," I said with a small grin. We spent hours painting side by side. At one point, Amara glanced at my canvas, a burst of bold colors, wild and free. "What's this one called?" she asked. "Awakening," I said. She smiled. "Perfect." That evening, back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked around. The space was small but filled with life. My paintings leaning against the walls, flowers on the windowsill, and books scattered across the table. It wasn't the mansion, it wasn't grand or impressive, but it was mine. And that made it beautiful. Then, one afternoon, an email from Daniel arrived in my inbox. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. The subject line read, "Please come home." For a second, my heart clenched. Old habits die hard. A part of me wanted to open it to see what he had to say, but another part, the stronger, wiser part, knew better. Instead, I hovered my finger over the delete button. But before I did, I opened it, not because I missed him, but because I wanted closure. The message was long. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he still loved me. He begged for another chance, promised to change, to start over. I read it once, then twice. And then I smiled, sadly but firmly. Because I realized something important. I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't love him either. He no longer had power over me. I replied with just one line. "Thank you for reminding me why I left." Then I hit send and blocked his email. When I told Amara about it later, she smiled and said, "That's strength, Lydia. Not revenge, not anger, just peace." Peace, that was exactly what it felt like. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Amara offered me a chance to host a small exhibition at her studio. "Your paintings tell a story," she said. "People will connect with it." I hesitated. "I'm not ready." She shook her head. "You're more ready than you think." The idea terrified me, but it also thrilled me. For so long, I had hidden my voice. Maybe it was time to use it. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the project. I painted like never before, each canvas a piece of my soul. There were paintings of storms and sunlight, of broken glass and blooming flowers, of a woman standing on the edge of the sea, finally free. When the night of the exhibition arrived, I was nervous. The room was full of strangers, talking, laughing, admiring the art. I stood in a corner, holding a glass of champagne, trying to steady my breath. Amara walked over and squeezed my hand. "Look around," she whispered. "This is your new beginning." And it was. People came up to me, asked about the paintings, wanted to know the stories behind them. I told them about heartbreak, loss, and finding myself again, about choosing to start over instead of breaking down. Near the end of the night, a young woman approached me. She had tears in her eyes. "Your work," she said softly, "it feels like you painted me." I smiled gently. "Maybe I did," I said. "Maybe I painted all of us who forgot who we were and then remembered." That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the studio. The lights were dim, the air warm and quiet. I looked at my paintings. The story of my pain turned into beauty, and I felt proud. I had taken my broken pieces and turned them into art. Into life. When I stepped outside, the city was glowing. The moon hung low, the air smelled like jasmine, and I felt a peace so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who cried on the floor of a hotel room, lost and terrified. I wished I could reach back in time, take her hand, and whisper, "You'll be okay. You'll be more than okay." Because I was. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of betrayal. I had found my voice, my strength, my purpose. And the best part, I had done it all on my own. As I walked home that night, I whispered to the stars, "You tried to bury me, Daniel. But you didn't know I was a seed. And as the city lights shimmered around me, I smiled. I was no longer the woman who forgot her passport, or the wife who stood broken in a mansion of lies. I was Lydia, the woman who remembered who she was. And I was finally awake. The morning after the exhibition felt different. There was still excitement in the air, but it wasn't the kind that made my heart race, it was the kind that made my soul hum quietly. For the first time in years, I woke up without dread, without questions, without the ache of wondering what I'd lost. I stretched in bed, the sunlight pouring through the sheer curtains, soft and golden. My little apartment was messy, canvases leaning against the walls, paint-stained brushes in cups, half-read books stacked on the floor, but it felt alive. It felt mine. A knock came at the door. When I opened it, Amara stood there holding a basket of pastries. "For the artist of the week," she said with a grin. I laughed. "You're spoiling me." "You deserve it," she said, walking inside. "Your show was beautiful, you should be proud, Lydia." "I am," I said honestly, "but it still feels unreal." She sat at the table and poured us both coffee. "Unreal is where real things begin," she said. "You planted a seed, now it's time to grow it." Her words lingered in my mind long after she left. Grow it. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about how much I wanted to build something lasting, something that belonged to me, not tied to anyone else's name or success. I had spent years helping Daniel grow his empire, handling the background work, smoothing his chaos, making him look flawless. But I had never done that for myself. That changed now. I sat down with a notebook and began to write down ideas, small dreams that had once lived in the corners of my heart. A gallery for independent artists. A safe space for women to express themselves through art, storytelling, and healing. I called it Rebirth Studio. It started as a sketch, a few words on paper, a whisper of what could be. But once the idea took hold, it consumed me. I wanted to create a space for women who had been silenced, who had lost themselves in love, in family, in expectations, just like I had. I wanted them to find their voices again. With Amara's help, I found a small space not far from the river. It was old, the paint chipped, the walls cracked, but when I stepped inside, I could see it. I could see what it could become. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture beneath my fingertips. "It's perfect," I said. Amara laughed. "Perfect, it needs a miracle." "Exactly," I said, smiling. "And that's what we're going to give it." For the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. I painted the walls white, scrubbed the floors, hung new lights. I reached out to local artists and women I'd met through Amara's classes, inviting them to join me. Every day, I woke up tired, covered in paint, but happier than I had ever been. At night, when the city went quiet, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and think about how far I'd come. The woman who once lived in a mansion built on lies had become someone who was building her own foundation, brick by brick, dream by dream. One evening, Amara and I stood in the center of the nearly finished studio. The walls gleamed. Canvases and sculptures filled the space. There was laughter, color, and warmth. "This is your legacy," Amara said softly. "No," I said, smiling. "This is our beginning." The grand opening of Rebirth Studio came a month later. The air buzzed with excitement. People filled the space, locals, artists, tourists who'd seen the flyers. The walls were lined with pieces from women who had stories of their own, stories of heartbreak, survival, strength. I stood near the entrance, welcoming guests, shaking hands, laughing. But inside, my heart was full in a way it had never been before. At one point, I saw Rosa, my cafe friend, walking in. She hugged me tightly. "You did it," she said. "Yes," I whispered, "I did." That night, as the lights dimmed and the last guests left, I sat in the middle of the studio, surrounded by art and silence. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because I finally understood something that had taken me so long to see. I wasn't just surviving Daniel's betrayal, I was thriving because of it. He had tried to control me, to shape me into someone small and quiet. But he had underestimated one thing: what happens when a woman remembers her power. Over the next few months, Rebirth Studio flourished. We held workshops, exhibits, and support groups. Women came from all walks of life, artists, mothers, survivors, each carrying their own story, each finding light again. Sometimes, I'd stand back and watch them laugh, create, and share their truth, and I'd think, this is what healing looks like. Then, one afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. The name on it made my stomach tighten for a second. Daniel. He'd somehow found my new address. The subject line was simple: I saw your exhibition online, you look happy. I stared at it for a long moment. The old me might have replied. The woman who once needed his approval might have felt something stir. But the woman I was now just smiled. I deleted it without a second thought. That was closure enough. That night, I hosted another small gathering at the studio. One of the young artists, a shy woman named Sophia, stood up and said, "Lydia, you changed my life. I was lost before I found this place." I felt tears sting my eyes. "No," I said gently. "You changed your life, you just needed a place to remember how strong you already were." The women around us clapped, some crying, some smiling. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. After everyone left, I walked home through the quiet streets. The moonlight bathed the city in silver. My heels clicked softly against the cobblestones. I breathed in the night air, and it felt like freedom. I passed by the water, the reflection of the bridge glimmering on the river's surface. I thought of who I used to be, the woman who forgot her passport, who returned home to betrayal, who thought her life was over. And I realized something profound. That moment, the one that broke me, had been my beginning all along. If I hadn't gone back for that passport, I would still be trapped in a beautiful lie. I would never have discovered this strength, this peace, this me. I stood there for a long time, watching the ripples dance across the water, and whispered to the night, "Thank you for breaking me open." Because through that pain, I had been reborn. And I wasn't afraid of life anymore. In fact, I was finally ready for it. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. Below, the city glowed with life, cars passing, laughter echoing, music drifting up from a bar down the street. I leaned against the railing and smiled. I wasn't defined by what happened to me anymore. I was defined by what I did next. And I had chosen to rise. That night, I wrote in my journal again. The final words I wrote before closing it felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. He said I wasn't enough, but I became everything. And I meant every word. The air was crisp that morning, the kind that felt clean, full of promise. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over Lisbon. The golden light spilled over the rooftops, warming everything it touched, including me. I had lived in this city for nearly a year now. A year since my life fell apart. A year since I walked away from Daniel and the illusion of perfection I'd once mistaken for happiness. A year since I found myself again. So much had changed. Rebirth Studio had grown beyond my imagination. What started as a small dream had become a movement. Women from all over Portugal, and even other countries, came to share their art, their voices, their pain, and their strength. We were no longer just artists. We were survivors, dreamers, builders. And I was no longer the woman who lived in someone else's shadow. I had become the light I once waited for. That morning, I received an invitation that made me smile. A prestigious art foundation in France wanted to feature my work in an international exhibit. The theme: reinvention. I laughed softly to myself. Life had a strange sense of irony. A year ago, I was standing in my old mansion, heartbroken and humiliated, wondering how I'd ever survive the betrayal. Now, I was being celebrated for turning that pain into something beautiful. After breakfast, I walked to the studio. The streets buzzed with life, vendors setting up stalls, the smell of fresh bread in the air, children running to school. When I arrived, the women were already there, chatting and working. Sophia was painting near the window, her strokes more confident than they had been months ago. Rosa, my friend from the cafe, was helping hang a new collection of art. "Morning, Lydia," they called in unison. "Morning," I said, smiling. "How's everyone today?" "Excited," Sophia said. we heard about your France exhibit. I blinked in surprise. How did you? Rosa grinned. You forget Lisbon is small, news travels fast. I laughed. Well, I guess I can't keep secrets anymore. Amara walked in a moment later, her eyes full of pride. You're going to do wonderful things there, she said. But don't forget this, she gestured around the studio. This was your first masterpiece. Her words hit me deep. She was right. Rebirth Studio wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of transformation. Every painting, every sculpture, every story shared within those walls carried the energy of survival and rebirth. That day, I spent hours helping others with their projects, giving feedback, listening, laughing. And for the first time, I realized something profound. Healing doesn't always come when you're alone, it comes when you give that healing away. As the day ended, the women started to leave one by one. The sun dipped low, casting golden light through the windows. I stayed behind, walking slowly through the studio, running my fingers along the walls. Every brushstroke, every piece of art, every burst of color told a story. My story. When I left the studio, the city was quiet. The streets glowed softly under the streetlights. I walked toward the river, as I often did when I needed to think. The water shimmered like melted gold. I stood there for a long time, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves. It reminded me of my own heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. And that's when I saw him. Daniel. He was standing a few feet away, older, thinner, and wearing the same expensive suit that used to intimidate everyone. But it didn't intimidate me anymore. He looked startled when he saw me. Lydia, he said softly, I can't believe it's really you. I froze for a moment, my heart steady but calm. I hadn't seen him since the day I walked out of our mansion. He took a step closer. You look incredible. Thank you, I said, my voice didn't shake. He smiled faintly, the same charming smile that once fooled me. I've followed your work. The gallery, the studio, it's amazing. I nodded, yes it is. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with something, regret maybe. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I studied him for a long moment. The old Lydia would have cried, she would have asked why. But the woman standing here now didn't need explanations. I know, I said simply. He blinked, caught off guard by my calm. I don't expect forgiveness, but I already forgave you, I interrupted. Not for you, but for me. He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, I said softly, I forgave you so I could move on, so I could stop carrying what you did to me. You broke me, Daniel, but you also set me free. I should thank you for that. He stared at me, speechless. You know what's funny, I said. If I hadn't forgotten my passport that day, I'd still be living that lie. I would still be pretending. But life has a way of leading us where we need to go, even if it hurts. He swallowed hard. You're different. I'm me, I said, maybe for the first time. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city hummed around us, soft and distant. Finally, he said, I'm glad you're happy, Lydia. I am, I said truthfully. And I meant it. He nodded, gave me a faint smile, and walked away. I stood there watching his silhouette fade into the distance. No anger, no pain, just peace. It was over. When I returned to my apartment that night, I sat on the balcony again, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about everything that had happened, every heartbreak, every tear, every step that had led me here. And for the first time, I saw it all as one long, beautiful transformation. Pain had been my teacher, freedom had been my reward. I picked up my journal and wrote. I forgot my passport that day, but maybe I was never meant to leave. Maybe I was meant to find my way back to myself first. I closed the journal, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Because that was the truth. Life didn't end when Daniel betrayed me, it began. I had built a new world from the ruins of the old one. A world filled with purpose, passion, and peace. A world that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. Maybe it would be love again, one day with someone kind, someone real. maybe it would just be me, traveling the world, creating, growing. Either way, I wasn't afraid. Because I knew who I was now. As the clock struck midnight, I whispered to the night, I made it. The stars shimmered above me, silent witnesses to my rebirth. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I knew I was. Epilogue. Months later, I stood in Paris, in front of my paintings at the international exhibit. The crowd murmured, admiring the pieces. One woman approached me and asked, "What inspired your work?" I smiled, a moment of heartbreak that became the beginning of everything. She nodded thoughtfully. "It feels powerful," she said. "It is," I replied. "It's about what happens when a woman stops waiting to be saved and saves herself." As she walked away, I turned back to my paintings. Bright colors, fierce strokes, life bursting from every inch. That was me now. Alive, bold, unapologetic. And as I stood there, surrounded by my art, my journey, my truth, I whispered the words that had become my mantra. I was never lost. I was only waiting to find my fire. And now, it burned brighter than ever.